All right. But if you want a story, here's about a story about a spy. The first Rebbe of Chabad was very opposed to Napoleon. Almost all of the other great leaders, Chassidic leaders also, of the Jewish people were very in favor of Napoleon. Because it seemed that Napoleon was very in favor of them. Napoleon's thing was, I think it's the motto of France even today: liberty, fraternity, and equality. He believed that the Jewish people were not inferior people like everybody else believed, and that they shouldn't be put into ghettos, but they should be given liberty and fraternity. They should be our friends. We should appreciate them. And equality, they should be on an equal basis and get equal rights with everybody else. And so everybody was agreed. All the great leaders were. But the first Rebbe of Chabad was tremendously opposed. And he said that if Napoleon wins, it'll be good for us physically. It says, elevate the glory of the Jewish people physically, but spiritually, it'll be a tragedy. And he said he had tremendous pain because even in the beginning, when Napoleon, I mean, I know a little bit about the history, but he conquered amazingly, very similar to the Nazis, very similar. I mean, cruelty wasn't part of their program. Death and cruelty wasn't part of Napoleon's program. He wanted exactly the opposite: life and liberty. And it was something like the Greeks, very similar to the Greeks, the story of Hanukkah. And then in the story of Hanukkah also, there was just a handful of men that fought against the Greeks. So here, anyway, Napoleon conquered, and the Alter Rebbe was very, very, pained to hear that the soldiers, the French soldiers, were, fraternizing with Jewish girls. And Jewish girls were, okay, which that was like almost unheard of in the time of the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad. Anyway, so the first Rebbe was so opposed to Napoleon that he actually sent a spy to spy on him. And the spy was called Rabbi Moses Meislich. But there's stories about him also, but I'll tell that story, God willing, Yom Rishon, if you remind me how Rabbi Moshe Meislich became a Chassid. That's a story in itself. Anyway, so Rabbi Moshe Meislich, he was a Chassid of the Rebbe, and he was very, very intelligent, and he was versed in a lot of languages, and in general was a very gifted person. Now, because the religious Jews, they were all backing Napoleon, and who was Napoleon fighting against? He was fighting against, in Russia, the Tsar, but in general, he fought against the kings. He wanted to depose all the kings, and everybody's going to be free. There weren't going to be any kings and monarchies and everything, even though he himself made himself into an emperor, but that's a different. So somehow or other, this Moshe Meislich, he got into to be one of the translators for Napoleon, to translate from Russian to this. Now, again, the Tsar, they were like ardent, what's it called, the Russian Orthodox, and they did everything they could. The later generations would even be worse, to get Jews to change their religion. And they used to conscript, later on, they started by the Alter Rebbe a little bit, to conscript young children, Jewish children. They would take them away, chappers, they would take Jewish children away from their parents. They would go through cities and take the Jewish, and they'd forcibly put them into the army and make them eat not kosher food and beat them, the terrible things. Anyway, but the Alter Rebbe said it's better to be under the Tsar and his idolatry than to be under Napoleon with like pure, atheism. So he sent a spy, and the spy was Moshe Meislich. And he sat in the room and he would listen to everything that was going on. And while he was translating, he was working, and he would listen. And he actually gave secrets. There was a lot of caches of arms when Napoleon would take over places. So he had to bring a lot of weapons and gunpowder and things like that, ammunition. And he would have to hide it somewhere. And he discovered where these places were, and he told it to the Tsar. and the Tsar would destroy these things. That was one of the brought to the defeat of Napoleon. And in fact, Napoleon won in Russia. He defeated the armies of Russia. But as he was leaving, the winter came in early, and he had to retreat. He had to leave, and the Russians used guerrilla warfare, and they ate away at his troops to the point where his troops were like decimated by the time they got back, and they were starving. They had to eat their horses and everything. Anyway, so a big cause of this, this decimation of Napoleon's army was this Moshe Meislich, to the degree that the Tsar even gave the Alter Rebbe and all of the Rebbe's after him a certificate that they were going to be an honorable citizen for all generations. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe used this. Anyway, okay, so this Moses Meislich, he's sitting in the war room and he's listening to what's going on. And Napoleon was a sorcerer. Napoleon had supernatural powers. When Napoleon came into Lyazna, he conquered the city where the Alter Rebbe was. The Alter Rebbe commanded that his house should be burned down. Alter Rebbe's house should be burned down, that nothing of his would fall into the hands of Napoleon, because Napoleon was a sorcerer. Napoleon had supernatural black magic powers. I mean, his victories were incredible. Anyway, and in fact, that's what happened when they came into Lyazna. So Napoleon, the first thing he did was send soldiers to the Alter Rebbe's house to get anything. And the house had been burned down, so there was nothing. Okay, anyway. So here we have, this is Moses Meislich is sitting in the room, and there must have been other maybe religious Jews there also, because Napoleon trusted all these people. They were all on his side. Napoleon came into the room, and everyone stood up at attention. And he went over to this Moses Meislich, and he said, "You are a spy." And he put his hand on Moses Meislich's heart to see if it was beating, right? To see if he was afraid. And it wasn't. He's put his heart in his heart. He said, "Okay," he said, "you're okay, but get out of here. I don't want to see you in here anymore. You know, I suspect you. Get out. We'll find somebody to take your place." Said, "Maybe you're not a spy, but I don't want you here." And he kicked him out. So afterwards, he went to the first Rebbe of Chabad, the Alter Rebbe, and he told him the whole story. And the Alter Rebbe said, "How did you manage to do it? I mean, Napoleon would have you killed in a minute. You know, there was no problem. He was a soldier. He was a warrior. Who knows how many people they killed in the name of equality and brotherhood and fraternity. To kill you was no problem. I mean, in fact, you were a spy, right? You were a spy." He said, "How did you do it that your heart didn't beat?" He said, "In Chassidut, we're trained to control our heart and give our heart to God. Like, if I can train my heart not to get excited about something as bad as my evil impulse, as powerful as my evil impulse, as for sure I can train my heart not to get excited, not to be afraid of Napoleon." And that's how he controlled himself. And that shows that it's possible for us to do the same. That if we're really concentrated on what's real, then we don't get excited about what's not real. Have a good Shabbos. Have a good day with Mashiach now. And a good Shabbos. And Bez Hashem, on Sunday, we'll meet again at 8:15. And we'll talk about how Mashiach arrived on Shabbos, and all the Jews are preparing, or they're arriving in the Holy Land, the holy city, the holy mountain, and the holy temple with Mashiach now.
Oh man, looking forward to seeing you in
Shalom
Yerushalayim.